This is the Butterfly's Wing, where we look at seemingly small things with unexpectedly large impacts. Today we ask the question, does the United States exist because of an Austrian girl? Specifically this girl, Maria Theresa, but more about her later. First, a brief mention of these guys, who got so ticked off they threw perfectly good tea in a harbor. Oh, and started a war. Now, to understand how we got the American Revolutionary War, and ultimately an independent United States, we first need to understand an earlier conflict, the 7 Years' War, sometimes called the French and Indian War. This war, which lasted for 7 or 9 or possibly 23 years, depending on whom you ask, was an incredibly complex conflict that involved more than a dozen countries fighting across 5 continents. If you were in Australia or Antarctica, you were probably okay. If you weren't, it was probably a rough 7 or 9 or 23 years. Since this is a short video, I'll summarize the conclusion of the 7 Years' War by saying that Britain, which was allied with Prussia, defeated France, which was allied with the Holy Roman Empire. Britain got 2 things in return: land, specifically French Canada and all the land west of the original 13 colonies as far as the Mississippi River, and massive, massive debt. So how did we get from the end of the 7 Years' War to the start of the American Revolutionary War? Well, that massive debt had a lot to do with it. Things were so bad for the British government after the 7 Years' War that about half of Britain's annual budget went just to interest payments. To help pay off this debt, Britain instituted new taxes on its American colonies, which was unpopular and led to calls of no taxation without representation. Britain also maintained mercantilist trade policies that were likewise unpopular. Governing this new American territory acquired from France was also a challenge for the British, who had to balance American colonists' desire to expand west against the interest of Native Americans and former French citizens already living in those territories. Particularly unpopular was the Quebec Act of 1774, which established rules for governing the British province of Quebec. This Act of Parliament voided land grants that had been given to American colonists, failed to establish a provincial legislature in keeping with what many Americans considered to be an important part of English tradition, and in the opinions of many American colonists showed too much deference to French Catholics. So debt and new territory from the 7 Years' War and the way the British dealt with these new circumstances helped lead to the American Revolution. The 7 Years' War also helped provide the conditions that eventually led to an American victory and an independent United States. Britain's war debts from the 7 Years' War didn't help them pay for the next war. It also didn't help that many American revolutionaries had gained valuable military experience fighting for the British against the French during the 7 Years' War. The most famous example is probably George Washington, who was an officer in the Virginia militia during the conflict and might even be the person responsible for starting the fighting in North America. More about that in another video, perhaps. There's also the crucial Franco-American alliance that helped defeat the British, an alliance that would have been far less likely if France hadn't given up its North American territory in 1763. After all, a strong, independent United States might not have sounded like such a good idea to Louis XVI if it would have boarded French territory. So that gives us some idea how the 7 Years' War led to an independent United States. But what does this have to do with Maria Theresa? And why do some people think the 7 Years' War actually lasted for 23 years? Well, that's where it gets really interesting and might make you wonder if perhaps everything might be different if not for Maria Theresa. Many historians consider the 7 Years' War as just a continuation of the War of the Austrian Succession, which is how they come up with that 23-year period. It's 23 years from the death of Charles VI in 1740, which ignited the War of the Austrian Succession, to the Treaty of Paris of 1763, which ended the 7 Years' War. Charles was the Holy Roman Emperor, which is maybe the coolest title ever. Since he had no living sons, his crown passed to, you guessed it, his eldest daughter, Maria Theresa, who in fairness was 23 at the time and probably looked more like this. Why did Maria Theresa's succession ignite a war? Well, this guy, Frederick II of Prussia, whom we now call Frederick the Great, considered it illegal for Charles' crown and territories to pass to a woman, since Salic law forbid women from inheriting land. So on December 16, 1740, less than 7 months after becoming King of Prussia, Frederick invaded Maria Theresa's territory of Silesia, claiming it for himself, igniting a war that would lead to another war, that would lead to yet another war, that would lead to an independent United States. All because Maria Theresa was a woman. Thanks for watching.